Hi everyone, welcome to another video. I'm Nguyen, and today we're going to do one of the videos I've kind of been looking forward to doing ever since I started BookTube a couple of months ago, because it's one of my favorite videos to watch every year by all of the people, and that is the favorite books of the previous year. I have 8 books for you, and I've ordered them, but it's a very loose order. So I do prefer book number 1 to book number 8, for example, but the difference between 8 and 7, negligible. Or they're so different, I can't really compare. They're apples and oranges sometimes. Anyway, let's jump into it. So first of all, place number 8, we have Michael Pollan's The Omnivores Dilemma, The Search of a Perfect Meal in a Fast Food World. I thought this was fascinating. It's non-fiction, and in this, Michael Pollan looks for how different types of meals are made. So he starts with a meal that is purely fast food, and he looks at the very industrialized industry around that. Then he looks at a meal that is already more biological, and in the last part he tries to make a meal where he goes hunting, where he does some gathering, etc, etc. And I found the first part and the second part, where he really goes into the industry and he looks at the influence of maize. This is very US centered, but it was still fascinating. But how maize is everywhere, and that that in the US meals consist for 80% of things based by maize, if I remember correctly. Might be more, might be less. But that we give animals that we eat maize to eat even though they can't cope it, and then we need to give them a lot of antibiotics just so they will live until, well, the date we have decided they're big enough for us to chop their heads off. The whole thing surrounding that, the economics, how the foods grow, that was fascinating. I also love the second part where he goes to a farm that really tries to make a whole circular economy around the processing of food. It was fascinating. When I read this on my phone, and I took so many notes, and I kind of don't know where those notes are. I think I wrote part of them in a book journal that I was still keeping at the time, but others I don't really know. So I'm looking forward to rereading this at one point and actually making notes in the margins. This is one of the first books that I thought it was okay that I would take notes, because there was so much information that I was fascinating. So Michael Pollan's The Omnivores Dilemma. Then on place number 7, we have The Toymakers by Robert Dinsdale. This is magic realism, and we meet a young girl that is pregnant and therefore has to run away from home, and she goes to work in a magical toy shop called the Emporium in London. And she gets into relationships with the owners, well, the sons of the owner, and she finds this place where she can finally start to be a little bit safe and finally maybe have a place for her child, and she starts building a life for herself. And the Emporium is this magical place where kids really get to play, really get to become even more kids, and even parents start to find the kids themselves again. And the second part of the book, and that's what really made me really love this book, is that it's not just about this girl that needs to find a place for her child. The second part of the book, there is also the influence of the Second World War, and the two sons of the owner have a different view on things, and they're always in a clinch with each other. They're always in a competition. There's this huge competition between them going on throughout the whole book. And that makes the book very, very interesting. It talks about post-traumatic stress. It talks about what it's like for people that are not from the UK to live in the UK during the Second World War. It talks about the importance of being a child and how we all have a monster in ourselves, but that finding the child is really a very good way to try to compensate that. I absolutely love this book, and if you like something that is going to make you think about the importance of the child within you, and you like atmospheric things, you are going to like this. Then on the 6th place, we have The French Antifada by Andrew Hussey, which I read in Dutch. This is non-fiction about the relationship between France and countries in North Africa, specifically Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. France in the 1860s colonized these countries, and in this book we get to read about how they were colonized, what it was like for the countries to be colonized by France, and how some groups were persecuted, others were not. And then we have, most importantly, the wars for independence and how the relationship between the countries is afterwards, and how the countries have been trying to find their own. The book focuses mainly on Algeria. France has a very complicated relationship with Algeria, and still in France today, we don't speak about the independence war of Algeria, we just talk about the Algerian war, which I find weird. I learned so much in this book. I took so many notes. It was absolutely fascinating. I didn't know much about this. I learned a little bit by reading the author Alice Zeniter in her book L'Art de Perdre, which will come out in English in a couple of months, where she talks already about a little bit about what it's like for an Algerian family to have to flee their country and go to France. But in this book we get a lot more information about the politics, about what it was like for the people living there. Andrew Hussey does a good job of showing how France reacted and the bad things France did, but also the groups that started organizing themselves in Algeria and Tunisia and in Morocco that were also doing dreadful things, and how all of these forces were pulling at each other, and with people just sitting in between and just suffering the horrible things that were happening. I think every French person should read this because it's part of our history, and it's part of our history that we are still not talking about. But yeah, I would highly recommend this, and I'm looking forward to rereading it at one point because I took so many notes, but I already forgot a lot of the things about it. And at the end also, by the way, Andrew Hussey also dives into what this war, what all of these things that happen, what they mean for the people of Algerian descent, of Moroccan descent, of Tunisian descent that now still live in France, and that how they are marginalized and what their chances are of leading a normal life, of not being sent to the prison, and etc. etc. The part about the prisons was fascinating. Anyway, The French Antifada by Andrew Hussey is The Wizard of the Crow by Ngugi wa Thiongo. I love this as well. All of these books were great. So this is fiction, but it's based on the Kenyan political system. So what Ngugi wa Thiongo did is that he fictionalized this country called Aboriria, and Aboriria has one big leader, and all of the politicians that, the ministers and etc. that work for that leader, they're always trying to make sure that he gets his way. They're trying to always be on his side, etc., etc. And this book is a satire about that. It talks about all of the consequences of having such a leader, of having everybody be like that, and all of the ridiculous situations that unfold. We have two characters that become the Wizard of the Crow, and that kind of become the symbol of being against the leader, if I can say. It's a lot more complicated than that. It is brilliantly written. I thought all of the characters that we have in this all play such an important part in getting to have an understanding of all of these systems, of all of the things. Again, it is hilarious, and if you're just slightly interested in the politics of another country, if you're slightly interested in how some of the corruptions takes place, then you will definitely love this. It is a bigger book, but it is absolutely worth it. And again, I laughed so hard at some pieces in this. It was so well done, and I'm looking forward to reading another book by Ngugi wa Thiongo next year. That's actually this year. On the fourth place, we have a book that I don't at the moment own, and that is Invisible Women by Criado Perez. I've talked about this in a recent video in my reading retrospective. It's a non-fiction, and it talks about the differences between men and women and how those are not taken into account when designing the world, basically. In that so many things that are designed, from a city to a glove, the differences between men and women, being social, being economic, being physical, are not taken into account, and the world is very much a men's world, and the influences that it has. It was a fascinating book. I will keep recommending it for a very long time, and I think in 2021 Criado Perez will have her second book out, and if not now, well, at least she started writing it, I believe, and that is going to be about the next step. So Invisible Women is mostly about showing all of the data, well, a lot of data about how the responsibilities that women often have are not looked at. For example, the care of elderly, the care of the children, the care of the home, those are always mostly tasks that are given to the women, but the things that women have to give up, have to do those things are not accepted as actual work. And so her second book apparently is going to be about what's next, how to fight that, what to do with it. And I'm so looking forward to it. Invisible Women has opened my eyes. It has so many actual numbers that it also helps to have these discussions about this, to show how ridiculous situations are that you kind of know, but when it's all stacked together, you're like, on the third place, we have another nonfiction, and that is We Crossed the Bridge and It Trembled by Wendy Pearlman. So in order to write this book, Wendy Pearlman talked to a lot of Syrian refugees. And what she did is that all of these stories, she kind of chopped them up into smaller pieces, and then she reorganized them by period in time. So in this book, we have 5 periods in time, and at the beginning she explains the political context, and then we have the stories of these actual people, the things that happen. So it starts during the reign of not the current leader, but the one before that, and what the situation was for the people, how scared they were, and things like that. And then we go through time and we see the next leader that was even worse, and how people were kind of taken from the street, and you didn't know whether you would see people again. And you see the start of the revolution, how organic that was, and the reply of the government, and how all of these forces started to work. But you see it from the point of view of the people that were actually in it, and some of these parts would just be one sentence, the others will be just a couple of pages. And with every next story, with every next point of view, with every next person, you would just dive a little bit deeper, and that makes this book so good and so heart-wrenching. Your heart will be ripped out so many times, because you start with just understanding why the revolution happened, but because with every step you just think a little bit deeper into the why, a little bit deeper into the how, a little bit deeper into the repercussions, a little bit deeper in the pain, it all becomes so, I mean, obviously it's real, but you start feeling it so much. So I'm very grateful to have read this book. I think everybody should read this. If you're only slightly interested in the refugee crisis, if you're interested in how the Syrian war developed, then you will absolutely love this. If you love stories that are about what people are going through and all of these historical things that are happening, then you will love this. Book number 2 is The Mountain Sing by Nguyen Phan. This is historical fiction, and it is set in Vietnam. We have 2 storylines. The first is from the point of view of a young mother, and she has to flee her village with her children because she and her husband used to own land, and because of the communist revolution, she has to flee because the people want to murder her for having land, and you can't be a landowner, that's bad. And she goes to the capital of Vietnam at the time, and it talks about that fleeing and how she has to make a life for herself and for her children, and the very tough decisions that she'd had to make at that time. And because so we then have a second storyline where it's more from the point of view of her granddaughter, and her granddaughter is waiting for her parents and her uncles to come back after the Vietnam War is over. Her parents went to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and she's kind of waiting for them to come back, if they're going to come back, how they're going to come back, etc. And because we have these 2 timelines, we get to see the impact of the decisions that the grandmother made on the children, and how they then had these different paths, and how that also then translates to what is happening with the granddaughter. It's a fascinating book. This is exactly what I like. This is historical fiction. You learn about a thing that you kind of know things about, but not really. You see what's happening to the people that are actually there, and because we have this family drama, you see the influence of what happened to one generation and how that ciphers through to the next generation, and that is. I think that is so important to understand our world today. This is very well written. It's very lyrical. And even more important, at least what I found fascinating, is that Nguyen Phan actually wrote this in English, which I find, she's a Vietnamese poet, and that she managed to find all of this energy, to put all this effort into making this an English book, I find that is worthy of so much respect, because writing a book in not your native language, respect. Very good book. Highly, highly, highly recommended. I highly, highly, highly recommend all of the other books, by the way. But not least, we have on number 1, In the Shadow of the Banyan by Ratner, which is one of my new favorite books. I absolutely love the writing in this. Just like with The Mountains Sing, it is historical fiction. And just as with Mountains Sing, it's set during the Communist Revolution, but this time then in Cambodia. And it's from the point of view of a young girl, and she has to flee her home with her family because the Khmer Rouge are taking over, and the Khmer Rouge have decided that everybody has to live in the countryside, has to be separated as a family, and just have to focus on producing food. And they do that so that people are very tired. They do that so that they don't have their loved ones, and then they won't protest. And we see all of this throughout a couple of years, I believe, with this young girl. And she starts out just as a child that sees the gods everywhere, that has this big imagination, that loves her father. And with every step, she is forced to... I don't know if it's growing up, but it's not being a child. She doesn't see the gods anymore. She has a complicated relationship with her mother. And this is all so well written. That is what I loved most about this. I mean, obviously, if you've been here a while, you know that I like these kind of stories where because you read of a historical thing through the point of view of a person, you get more of an understanding, you feel it more. But with this one, the writing was so phenomenal. It is so lyrical. I absolutely love this. Lyrical writing is my absolute new favorite writing style, and I need to look for more books that are written in that way. And Vaddey Ratner has, luckily for me, written a second book, so I'm excited to get that one at one point, because if the writing is going to be even just similar, she's definitely going to be a new favorite author. I highly recommend In the Shadow of the Banyan if you, like me, like historical fiction, if you are interested in seeing what it means to have such a revolution, what it means to a child, to have your family being ripped apart, you don't really know what's happening, but you still, because you're a child, you have so much hope. So well written. I absolutely love that book. But I loved all of these books, and I loved even more books, and it was pretty okay reading year, I think I can say. I don't think In the Shadow of the Banyan is a new all-time favorite, but it's definitely up there. So yeah, these were all my favorite 8 books of the year. There are 50% non-fiction, and I have to think about what that means, because if you watched a previous video, you know that I currently read 25% non-fiction, and I'm happy with that number. But if 50% of my favorite books are non-fiction, maybe I should read non-fiction? I don't know. What do you think? Have you read any of these books? What did you think of this? I'm always curious when people have read a similar book that I found a favorite and that they don't necessarily see it as a favorite, what the things are that you didn't necessarily love the way I did. So I'd love to hear about that. And I'd love to hear about the books that you read this year that you absolutely loved as well. So I'll talk to you in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.